For those who denied being Christians, worship of the gods and emperor gained them their freedom. Pliny's inquiry received a reply which is published along with his letters. Although Emperor Trajan's response is much shorter, he states, quote, "The method you have pursued, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cases of those denounced to you as Christians is extremely proper. It is not possible to lay down any general rule which can be applied as fixed standard in all the cases of this nature. No search should be made for these people. When they are denounced and found guilty, they must be punished, with the restriction, however, that when the party denies himself to be a Christian, and shall give proof that he is not, that is, by adoring our gods, he shall be pardoned on the ground of repentance, even though he may have formerly incurred suspicion. Informants without the accuser's name subscribed must not be admitted in evidence against anyone, as it is introducing a very dangerous precedent, and by no means agreeable to the spirit of the age," unquote. So when Zeitgeist says it's only a few sentences and it doesn't reference Jesus, they are way off base. In fact, if I were to read every passage about Jesus from outside sources, it would take a very long time. They bring up Josephus as being a forgery. There are good indications that the majority of the text is genuine. There is no textual evidence against it, and conversely, there is very good manuscript evidence for this statement about Jesus, thus making it difficult to ignore. The vast majority of Christian and atheist scholars conclude that Josephus did write about Jesus, not only in the brief statement concerning James, but also in the longer account. In 1972, Professor Shlomo Pines of Hebrew University in Jerusalem released a study on the Arabic manuscripts containing Josephus' statement about Jesus. It includes a different and briefer rendering of the entire passage. David Flusser of Hebrew University in Jerusalem stated, "It is quite plausible that none of the arguments against Josephus writing the original words even applies to the Arabic text, especially since the latter would have had less chance of being censored by the church." In addition, Flusser notes that an earmark of authenticity comes from the fact that the Arabic version omits the accusation that the Jews were to blame for Jesus' death, which is included in the original reading. James H. Charlesworth of Princeton concludes, quote, "We can now be as certain as historical research will presently allow that Josephus did refer to Jesus, providing corroboration of the gospel account," unquote. So no, Zeitgeist isn't up to date with modern scholarship on Josephus. We actually have around 42 sources for Jesus within 150 years of his life. Pliny the Younger, Tacitus, Suetonius, Josephus, Thallus, Lucian, Marabar Serapion, Valentinius, Phlegon, the Gnostic Gospels, Celsus, Tertullian, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul's writings, Hebrews, Jude, and 1st and 2nd Peter. As Dr. Gary Habermas and Mike Licona write, quote, "Tiberius Caesar was the Roman emperor at the time of Jesus' ministry and execution. Tiberius is mentioned by 10 sources within 150 years of his death: Tacitus, Suetonius, Paterculus, Plutarch, Pliny the Elder, Strabo, Seneca, Valerius, Maximus, Josephus, and Luke. Compare that to Jesus' 42 total sources in the same length of time. That's more than 4 times the number of total sources who mention the Roman emperor during roughly the same period." In regard to those who gripe about the Gospels, historian Michael Grant writes, quote, "But above all, if we apply to the New Testament as we should, the same sort of criteria as we should apply to other ancient writings containing historical material, we can no more reject Jesus' existence than we can reject the existence of a mass of pagan personages whose reality as historical figures is never questioned," unquote. Now, nearly 100% of scholars, atheist and Christian, agree that Jesus lived. Most atheist scholars grant the crucifixion and empty tomb as well, such as Gerd Ludermann of Germany and many others. Only fringe scholars like Acharya S. and her camp say Jesus never existed, and as we have seen through films like Zeitgeist, they lie to get their message across. Of course, Acharya's and Zeitgeist's conspiracy theory would not be complete unless they point out the perpetrators. They need to show who is responsible for assembling all this information of pagan gods and astrological information from around the world, and explain how and when they met up to write the first ancient biblical manuscripts and started Christianity. In Acharya S.'s book The Christ Conspiracy, she frantically insists it's the Masons. Now, I have studied Masonry and the New World Order thoroughly, debated the subject, arguing for a Masonic conspiracy which started in 1776, and even made a documentary film concerning it, so I absolutely know Acharya inside concedes there is no real physical data to support her outlandish theory that she proposes. So in her book on page 283, she asks herself, quote, "Where were these ubiquitous Masons when Christianity was being formed? Why is there so little mention in the texts of time? They certainly existed, as it was they who were erecting massive and magnificent edifices all over the globe. The Masons were there, perpetually hidden behind the scenes," unquote. So in other words, she has absolutely no evidence for her theory, and without this crucial part, the Christ conspiracy doesn't work. She provides no objective documentation that these supposed ancient Masons built all these massive structures in the world, or even existed at all in antiquity, and she is vague in describing which structures she is even referring to. If she means the pyramids, how would a few Masons be able to make a pyramid? Think about it. That would take thousands of people. Even with that many, we still have no idea how it is even possible to build the pyramids. She says the biblical Nimrod who built the Tower of Babel was considered the first Mason. But it doesn't matter if modern society or Freemasons say he was a Mason. You need data, and for that claim there is none. One must understand, all that Acharya is offering is legend. Masons have no proof Nimrod was the first Mason. He built a big tower that Masons imitate. So what? That doesn't prove he was a Freemason. All she can offer is quotes from fringe authors who have no evidence themselves, or quotes that don't even support her thesis. I contacted the historian and Freemason Rich Rodriguez and asked him the following questions. Is there any actual data that you are aware of that gives evidence for Nimrod actually being the first Freemason, as in he started the group, or is that just legend? Also, Hiram and the handshakes, is there any data that you know of that says the handshakes were actually done by him, or is that legend? Rich responded and simply said, quote, "It's all legend." So although Acharya writes as if she is presenting fact, she is presenting nothing of the sort. Acharya cites Thomas Paine, Origins of Freemasonry, but the accepted term for hundreds of years was simply Masonry, or operative Masonry, because they were merely craftsmen and guildsmen. It wasn't until 1717 in London that they were even known as Freemasons. Some would say the late 16th century at the earliest. It was at this point Freemasonry allowed anyone to join, and not just craftsmen or guildsmen, as it had been previously. And it wasn't until 1776 that Freemasonry was involved with any big conspiracy. Adam Weishaupt and his order infiltrated Freemasonry. Before then, there was no Masonic conspiracy. The truth is, Masonry didn't start until 800 years ago, according to our data and the vast majority of historians and research. Only fringe authors like Acharya S. say otherwise. As for the Thomas Paine quote, he doesn't even say Masons created Christianity. He just gives his opinion on how he thinks both Masonry and Christianity are sun worship, which is illogical in and of itself. But he doesn't claim Masons created Christianity as Acharya asserts. If the claim is that Christianity was based on sun worship, how do you explain how the Jews went from sun worship to Jesus when sun worship was forbidden in Judaism? Then she quotes Higgins saying, quote, "Every part of Christianity refers back to Abraham, and it's all Freemasonry," unquote. But Freemasonry didn't start until 1717, or at the earliest the 16th century, as noted by scholars. She claims that Jesus and Paul were Masons as proof, but she had just finished writing nearly 240 pages on how she thinks Jesus never existed. The inconsistency and illogic here is very evident. In the last paragraph of Acharya S.'s book, The Christ Conspiracy, she says, quote, "Despite the vilification, or in other words, slanderous defamation of the so-called New Age movement, the fact is we are entering into this New Age. I am with you always to the close of the age," so ends the Gospel of Matthew. What does this mysterious statement mean? And why was this all-important book ended with it? The age referred to in the Gospel tale is that of Pisces, unquote. Now, it is abundantly evident that the whole purpose of Zeitgeist Part 1 and the Christ Conspiracy was to induct you into the New Age movement. Despite the total deconstruction of Acharya S. and her camp, they will continue to persuade the young generation to join their New Age Brotherhood of Mystery. Study, learn, and help us overcome this trend of malicious lies put forth by the New Age movement.